Good day, everyone, and welcome back to session number 2 of the Intelligent Automation World Series. My name is Rochelle Hood, and I'll have the pleasure of serving as the chairperson for this week's event and the moderator for many of the session. But today, I'm absolutely delighted that we also have a host and a wonderful panel to present to you. Before we get to that, though, let's make sure that you can get the most out of this session by going through a couple of quick logistics with you. First of all, in your audience view screen, 2 important boxes to be mindful of. On the left side of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A box. As soon as we start going, please ask your questions early, put comments, reflections. We really get the most out of this when you engage with us, and the panelists are very eager to see what questions that you may have. Also, use that same box if you have any technical issues with the webinar platform, or should you have any questions related to the conference week as a whole, put that information in there, and Aya, who has joined us today as our technical support, will be happy to get right back to you on that. Now, equally as important, directly below that, everyone gets a gift, not only the gift of the wisdom and insights you're going to learn today, but also some takeaways, some digital takeaways to take with you. 3 items there. We have the ultimate guide to choosing the right RPA solution, 5 case studies to inspire your RPA strategy, and also 3 ways RPA gives your business the competitive edge. You may download those now anytime throughout the session, but if you're so attached to the content that you don't have a chance to download those, don't worry, because one day from now, you'll receive a link to the recording. In that same link, you'll be able to download those resources at that time. So without further ado and those items out of the way, it's absolutely my pleasure to welcome our host, Kofax, to today's session. Danielle Schmidt, as the Senior Product Manager from Kofax, is going to introduce our panel and get things kicked off for us. Danielle, over to you.
Thank you, Rochelle, and thanks for the introduction, and welcome also from my side to the session about the promise of RPA and where Forbes Insights and PwC share their findings today. So very quick recap. I think you know robotic process automation, or as we say RPA here, is really an emerging and hot automation technology. And as you're aware, most likely, RPA is about here, process automation that uses software robots to automate repetitive tasks, manual processes, and most important, I think, also augment the work of organizations' workforce. So we will see today, or in this session here right now, very interesting topics. And let me kick off here who is on the speaker panel here today. As you have heard from Rochelle, my name is Danielle Schmidt, and I'm part of the product marketing team at Kofax. And I think I'm being now around here for over 20 years in the enterprise software automation business, and I'm responsible for the worldwide marketing plan, market requirements, and positioning for the various software solutions such as robotic process automation. And I'm very glad, and it's really my pleasure here to have today 2 speakers here with me who have great insights into the automation and in particular here also into the RPA market. So let me introduce first here Dan Armstrong, and Dan Armstrong is Forbes contributor from Forbes Insights here. So glad to have Dan here, and he's a long-standing Forbes contributor who writes on IT and analytics for B2B services companies, in particular in the technology, financial, and professional services sector. And Dan has worked in data analytics, research, and editorial positions at Forbes, at The Economist, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. And he has also moderated panels at conferences for the World Bank, IBM, and Dell, and spoken at many in the IT industry events as well. So glad to have Dan today here on the call. And also to have Michael Engel here, who is Intelligent Automation Leader from PwC for Emerging Technologies. And Michael is a consulting industry leader with over 2 decades of building and leading organizations here that support clients in extending, enhancing, enriching, and empowering their organizations in the extraction of genuine business value. And currently, he's focusing here on the impact that digital labor like robotic process automation can have on both sides, the seller and consumer of services. So glad to have Michael here on this call today as well. What we are going to cover here today, so here's a brief overview, and Dan and Michael are covering really some interesting topics for you. So I hope you can get here a lot out of this here as well. Dan will be kicking off this with some findings of his study and basically on how businesses are using RPA, where they have benefited, and maybe also some obstacles here. Then we will cover where RPA offers the most promise and potential for automating business processes. And next we will cover or share with you what needs to be in a, let's call it smart automation toolbox here, and what mix of technologies offer here tremendous time to value with really the least disruption here. And next we will be viewing on how to measure ROI and go here really beyond just the bottom line, for example, cost savings or something like this, so what we can really here consider. And also another aspect that will be highlighted is how intelligent automation is really paramount here for the future of work. So with that, and without further ado, let's get started, and let me hand over to Dan to kick this off. And Michael, if you have any perspective or questions here, feel free to chime in. But Dan, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for that generous introduction. I work for Forbes. I cover technology. I used to work for Deloitte, and before that at The Economist, and before that worked at a capital markets boutique in Lower Manhattan and on the foreign exchange desk. So my background is really finance, but we all end up being in technology in the end at this time. So I'm going to talk to you about the results of a survey that we did on robotics process automation. Now, I knew Kofax before I started on this project. About 10 years ago, I was trying to do screen scraping. I was grabbing data off Amazon to create network diagrams of Amazon product recommendations. You know, people who bought this also bought that. And I was using Python and some libraries in Python, and it was extremely tedious. It was a lot of suffering. And then I discovered a product called Kofax, which was later bought by Kofax. My scraping process went from tedious to easy, and I was able to create these beautiful network diagrams of product recommendations. I have a slight background in RPA, or at least an early manifestation of it. I've also done a lot of interviews of people implementing RPA, and the more people I talk to, the more transformative it seems. So let me tell you about the survey. First, let me tell you just basically, I know you're all RPA experts. You're probably more experts than I am, but I'll just tell you how I define it. It's a form of automation that started with the idea of building bots, digital workers that mimic human actions at the keyboard. So it's in its most basic form, it's like a macro. It records keystrokes, it plays them back, and it does things like extracting names and numbers from canned text from databases, paste them into documents, and then routes the documents to the right places. And in its more advanced form, it takes in data from anywhere, from mobile devices, paper documents, even images, and it strips out information using the same kinds of cues and intelligence, in quotes, that a human would. So we surveyed businesses, and we tried to discover where they are with RPA, where they plan to go, and what, if anything, is keeping them from getting there. Here's who we surveyed. It's a senior group. There were 302 survey respondents. They're mostly in the C-suite. They're split roughly 1/3 each between Europe, North America, and the rest of the world. They're from big companies, 3/4 over $2 billion in revenues, and the rest over $1 billion. And they're from a broad range of industries. A quarter are manufacturing, the rest are services, mostly financial services, but also retail and transportation. And here's what they told us. Most of them are happy with their processes. So what this question says specifically is, how optimized are your processes to accomplish your business goals? And about 1/3 say that all their processes are optimized. Another half says that most are optimized. And the rest, about 20%, say that most should be rethought or that all their processes are broken. Now that's a very positive picture.
Hey, Dan, this is Mike. May I
there
ask a question about this?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
As I'm looking at this, it's a very interesting picture. I'm wondering if there were any differences related to the industries that you surveyed.
Yeah, there were some differences. In terms of having nailed their processes, in terms of having the most optimized processes, the number one industry was banking. And that's interesting because banking was the first industry to adopt RPA in a big way. And number two is manufacturing, which is under tremendous competitive pressure to cut costs and to automate the assembly of products. So those organizations, those industries say that their processes, a lot more say that their processes are optimized. Now what's last? Retail is last. Retail isn't doing well. Their processes are not, they have more processes that are broken. Insurance is also not doing as well. So yeah, there were some industry differences.
Thanks for that.
And here are some other differences. Who was most positive about the processes and who was least positive? This is not an industry breakdown, but it's a position, seniority, region breakdown. And the least positive people were CFOs. And if you ever suffered through a financial close, you know why. Hours of manual input, of checking, consolidating big spreadsheets. It's kind of low value, high stakes, and there's a lot of suffering when you do a financial close. And the CFO that can find a way to do that fast, cheap, and accurate has tremendous capability. We used to call the close the financial the dial tone. The dial tone of finance. It's what you need to nail down before you can do things that are more interesting. And that's one reason that RPA often starts in the finance function and then it spreads outward to other departments.
You know, Dan,
so,
I'm not surprised by that slide. You know, finance area has traditionally been where we've seen the most traction. The flip side of that is the guys in finance have been at this for a while, right? Particularly in the transactional side and shared services and outsourcing. So it is interesting to see that they still remain the least satisfied.
Yeah. Well, they probably know what's possible and they know that they're not there yet, whereas others may not know what's possible.
Good point.
So the survey respondents said that their processes are well-defined and they're well-documented. And that's really what they mean when they say they're optimized. They followed a detailed series of steps instead of sort of it's called a happy path, sort of a conceptual happy path. It's not aspirational, it's not idealized, it's very, very specific. We do A, then we check B, then we do C, then we pass something on to person X. And we perform those processes consistently. We do it the same way time after time. Now, not everyone said this, but most people did. Between 2/3 and 3/4 claim that their processes are detailed, documented, and consistent. But here's the rub. They say their processes are optimized, but optimization does not mean automation. It's not the same thing. So when I was in college, this was long before the days of digital, I had a job which was feeding X-ray negatives into a developing machine. You'd pick up a sheet, you'd put it in the feeder, and then you'd go on to the next one. And I got very good at that job. I was fast, I was careful, I was consistent. You could say that process was optimized, and it was. It was, given the constraints, but it was manual. It was a very manual process. So when executives say that they've optimized their processes, just remember one thing. Optimization always exists under limits. Optimization has constraints. It's the most cost-effective and highest performing process given existing constraints. So think about Henry Ford. The assembly line over 100 years ago cut the time to assemble a car from a couple of days to a couple of hours. Now, nobody would say that process wasn't optimized. That was very optimized. It was optimized for its time, but it was still basically a manual process. So that's why executives can claim that their processes are optimized, but also say that there's lots of room for improvement. But before management realizes that there's room for improvement, they need to understand what's possible. And many of them are unaware of the possibilities that automation offers. So I talked to an automation guy at one of the big ad agencies. They did a 1-minute video with 2 panels. On the left, an employee doing the work, and on the right, a robot doing the work. By the time the employee was halfway through the process the first time, the robot had done the same process 220 times. This was an hour-and-a-half presentation, but the only thing that the audience remembered was that 1-minute video. That told the whole story. So every person that I talk to in the RPA research that I'm doing has a story like that. It's a story about when management, which had previously thought that the processes were optimized, saw the constraints drop away and realized the possibilities in automation. So when 80% say that all or most of the processes are optimized, just remember that's not kind of the end of things. There are still big improvements that are possible. And we see it here. We see that there's lots of scope for further automation. Processes are still pretty manual. And it's a good thing that the processes are optimized because it means they're ready to automate. So because before you optimize a process, you have to define it, you have to document it, you have to standardize it. In other words, you can't automate a mess, right? You want to automate a process that is ready for automation, and the first step of getting that process ready is to nail it cold. So here you see that among the businesses that have embarked on this journey, this RPA journey, they give it an overwhelming vote of confidence. RPA checks every box: time savings, collaboration, cost savings, employee satisfaction. And I think the most notable of the statements on this chart is the first one. Our leadership recognizes the importance of process automation to our future success. 9 out of 10 executives agreed with that statement, and most of them agreed strongly. I think that we can agree that without the support of senior management, an initiative like RPA wouldn't go anywhere. So what are the problems that companies are facing? One of them is free text, okay? Free text is the next big improvement to come. It's still in the early stages. I talked to a process automation person at a company that gets RFPs, and they found that these RFPs, they took about 60 hours to respond to an RFP. And what their bot, they built a bot, and what their bot does is to interpret the questions in the RFP, that's free text, match them to a set of pre-written responses, and if there is no match, and frequently there is no match, routes them to the person whose resume indicates, they have the information in Salesforce, whose resume indicates that they'd be able to answer the question. So most of the managers who answer this question say that they're at least part of the way there when it comes to interpreting unstructured text. But about a quarter say they still scrutinize all their documents manually. The other issue is that for many companies, there's still way too much manual orchestration. A third of the respondents have robots that do small tasks, but humans have to string them together into larger processes. Robots are helping, but there's still too much human intervention.
And Dan, from that, that's another one that kind of surprised me, right? So the numbers are pretty high in terms of folks that are using orchestration. And so do you think it implies that there are that many clients or that many companies that have gotten to really straight through processing? Or is it really just a reflection of, kind of combining or stringing things along?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think a lot of the responses to this survey seem to be extremely optimistic, and this is something I've done maybe 70 or 80. I've done a lot of surveys, and this is something I see a lot. That this is a survey bias, basically, that people who write surveys know well. They call it the Lake Wobegon effect. If you know the Lake Wobegon stories, you know that the closing line is all the women are strong, the men are good looking, and the children are above average. Of course, everybody can't be above average. But, we all overestimate our capabilities. We all think that we're better than average drivers. And this applies to organizations too. Respondents think that their companies are better than they are. And specifically, in this case, that their processes are better than they are. And the way you catch that bias is by asking follow-up questions. In this case, the follow-up question was, how can processes be improved? And we found that many of the respondents said that the processes were too manual. They were optimized, but the processes were optimized given the way that they're done now. I think that there's a bias towards optimism in a lot of these results, but nevertheless, directionally, I think that they're correct.
Thanks.
So we see that the companies that have undertaken the RPA journey are pretty positive about it. And if you look at the bars on the far right, I know that's very small text, but the very far right is, those are key performance indicators that have shown greater than 25% improvement. And you look at the top one, happier employees. The employees are more satisfied. And then the next two, efficiency and customer satisfaction. That's what stands out to me. Happier employees, more satisfied customers, and more efficiency. I mean, that's pretty impressive that those are the top three in terms of big improvements. So here's what they said that is holding them back. I think it's cost prohibitive. They've set up these outsourcing processes, and they think that that's adequate. They don't have the skills. Some of them say that their senior leadership has not bought into it, and it's difficult to estimate the ROI. So I think there are responses, there are answers to all these questions, but that's basically, what they're saying. I'm sure they'd be happy to see those issues resolved, but that's what the survey results say. So I'm going to summarize this using a story type format. So once upon a time, there was an assembly line. Now that was an optimized processes. Assembly time went from, it took a long time and then it happened very quickly once the assembly line was in place. And then the world went digital. So we created a digital assembly line. People got very, very good at doing digital tasks very quickly. and they became very productive. Then automation tools came along, first for small tasks, then for bigger processes, and then we saw the start of routines being automated and exceptions handled by humans. And things got better. And then a funny thing happened. We started to automate more and more, and we began to scrutinize those exceptions through the lens of AI, and we wondered, maybe we could automate even more. Maybe we can delegate even more to the robots. And the more we can delegate to the robots, the more we can up-tier our own jobs and make our own jobs better. So what's the end of the story? We don't know. We don't know what the end of the story is. John Hagel at Deloitte says that a story has an ending, but a narrative is open-ended. So this is a narrative. We don't know the ending. You create your own ending. Let me just quote one of my interviewees about his own sort of intermediate-term vision. This is the ending that he's looking for. He says, we're discovering our way as we go, but the vision in the next 3 years is to, 1, equip all of our employees with some kind of digital robot assistant, and 2, give everyone access to a platform where they can design their own robotic solutions without IT. That's his end game. That's all I've got. Thank you. Michael?
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for the insights and for the storyboard. I intend to swipe that from you if you don't mind, because truly this is just the beginning. So appreciate that. And I overused the word surprise as I was watching, but I will admit I was very surprised by some of the outcomes from your study. Particularly as it related to respondents' view of process maturity. And as you said, I mean, we can maybe chalk some of it up to optimization, being optimistic, but at the same time, it has to be directionally correct. So very interesting. But as I listened to you run through the results of the study, I was paying close attention to buzzwords and consultant speak. And I'm pleased to see that the context of the questions was well understood based on the possible choices. Now, I like to stick this slide in as it represents my nightmare of buzzwords, trying to kind of figure out which things apply and when to apply them. And I think, Dan, had the questions been asked to the same participants with no structure around the possible responses, the results probably would have been quite different. So, I mean, this is an area which is still new enough to suffer from a good deal of confusion based on a lack of standard nomenclature. And I'm sure as listeners listen to some of my esteemed colleagues over the course of the next couple of days, you'll note we may use different terms. So let me set a baseline for this discussion, or for the rest of my discussion. From a technology perspective, we tend to think of intelligent automation in a very similar way to our friends at Kofax. It is indeed, kind of the layering of technologies from RPA to unstructured data capture to orchestration that really enables a unique opportunity for business units to take more of an active role in automation. And by using some pretty sophisticated technologies that are, well wrapped and easy to use, drag and drop editors, business users can quickly have an impact on tasks that are currently manually done, as Dan pointed out. That said, I do want to kind of stress that this is not strictly a do-it-yourself environment. It's an opportunity really to work more collaboratively with IT and move from simple task automation to broader process automation. I mean, after all, the gaps in our systems that we fill with people today are often the most difficult bits to automate, or else IT would have plugged them years ago, right? So, as a brilliant luminary friend of mine likes to say, if a process hasn't been automated in the history of modern technology, maybe there's a reason, right? So, which leads us to kind of the rest of the story of defining intelligent automation, or at least our definition of intelligent automation. So, Another thing from the Forbes study I learned is that a higher than anticipated number of respondents are happy with process automation they've done so far. I loved hearing it because I'm getting a little tired of hearing many of the analysts cite 50 to 70% of RPA programs fail to meet business objectives. So, I struggle with, how to reconcile those types of dire warnings with the insights from the survey. And, clearly more organizations recognize that the technology itself is not the silver bullet, right? So what have they done? We think, based on our work with hundreds of clients in this space and of course doing it ourselves, that there are 5 pillars that are really essential to intelligent automation strategy overall. Clearly the technology is one, but we really need to take this opportunity to rethink the business process. We need to consider the workforce both now and in the future. And we need to think about governing this new workforce of robot workers, right? And consider the business benefits beyond just simple headcount reduction. I mean, every company needs to take a serious look at how they're approaching automation, especially as these new tools put the power to solve problems and streamline tasks into the hands of business users. So Daniel asked me, so where does process automation offer the most promise for reinventing business process? I thought about that, and I said I would argue that the opportunities are everywhere, that people are doing work that takes them away from adding value to the organization or themselves and their careers, right? So that's kind of an easy out. But again, if we accept that it's not just about the technology, and we can start with business challenges in mind and allow automation to enable us to reimagine processes as different combinations of human and digital labor, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So let me use PwC as an example. We have recognized that there is value in task automation that helps individuals transform how they do their work, as well as value in transforming the entirety of a process. And eventually, at some point in the future, in automating entire service stacks. So to that end, what we're doing here in the firm is we're establishing a culture of both citizen-led and business-led automation. And so citizen-led implies putting the power of this type of automation technology in the hands of all of our professionals in the firm. So tens of thousands of people will be using this technology in the coming months and years. The idea is that we want to recognize everyone's ideas have merit and their automations that they're building actually can have value. I mean, so much so that at this point, people are getting paid for sharing their ideas in the community. So while building, simple automations around, the old fetching of data from multiple systems, stuff we've been doing for years and years, and transforming it in some way, and finally getting to the step where we can visualize and analyze that data, may not seem pristinely aligned with our concept of intelligent automation. The result of having thousands of our professionals participate is a continuous source of innovation for us that we can then take to the next step of industrializing for use across our firm and for our clients. So as for the business-led side of this, the more transformative automation, it implies a broader view of the process, right? So thinking about a case with a company's internal compliance function, what the client wanted, or what they thought they wanted, was to identify ways to reduce the overall costs associated with the process. In simple terms, with the activities that took most of the time were around crudely stare and compare tasks, comparing scanned images with systems of record to identify non-compliant transactions that the team could then go and further investigate and take actions on. So by simply taking the time to reimagine the process and not just focus on the obvious benefits of RPA and data capture in this case, the team could define a process of continuous audit to allow the client to increase the sample size of their audit from 15% to 100%. So now, just by kind of some simple tweaks and thinking about the process more broadly, we were able to, instead of reducing the cost by a few $1,000s, the company can look forward to recovering millions of dollars in lost fees. A big difference, right, when we start to change the paradigm of how we think about the process. So this type of automation really provides an an opportunity to really re-engineer the processes as we automate. So thinking about the workforce, this is a great question, right? I was asked just how will intelligent automation become paramount for the future of work? Daniel was kind of alluding to some of this before, but how we work is constantly changing, and it was true in the Industrial Revolution, part of your storyboard, Dan, and now again in the automation revolution. But however, I think with this particular revolution, things are going to move much more rapidly. We're going to have to adapt to change much more rapidly. So if you can imagine a workplace where automation empowers people in every function to make continuous improvements themselves without the need to learn how to code or relying entirely on IT, we need to consider both the transition of our current workforce as well as what the capabilities required of the future workforce are going to be. So we have a client, one of my favorite clients in fact, who in addition to his role as a finance executive is also responsible for process automation more broadly in the firm. And he's come to the realization that his future workforce will consist more of people with engineering backgrounds who can learn tax or finance than the other way around. So recognizing that principles of design thinking and engineering are going to become very, very important to the future of work. And in fact, you think about the workforce as it's that's just coming into being now. There's an expectation on their part that this type of technology is going to be there for them and they'll be able to take advantage of it. So empowering functions like finance will also require a cultural shift for the organization, as every function, including IT, will change how they approach work and what they do day to day. So the other thing to consider here is this: if employees are part of the change and experience its benefits and see the potential for their career growth, they'll embrace the automation and not become paralyzed by fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Not that we've seen a lot of it. I can say, across the hundreds of engagements that I've been involved with, I've never seen really folks running for the door, because it's about, there's that factor of curiosity around robotics and this type of automation generally. But we really do have to start to consider that as options change in the future. And we all know that structural change to the labor force resulting from AI and automation is coming, and it's going to have a dramatic impact on the relationship between man and machine. So what I encourage is that we remember that the people and culture are really one of the key secrets to the automation success, and we need to determine how we'll enable our current workforce and meet the expectations of a very demanding future workforce. Being a Big Four firm, I would be remiss if I didn't touch on governance, although I know that's not the point for today. So I won't spend much time on governance, but I do want to emphasize that automation needs a different governance model than traditional IT. While we'll borrow from IT rigor, we can't be consumed by it, right? There's a sense of the need for speed in this space. That's what it's all about, and empowering individuals and encouraging them to create automation, provide ideas, and otherwise be involved in it. But we do need to consider some things around internal audit and risk planning, as automation brings new risks that must be managed. And our suggestion is really to begin thinking about governance early in your automation journey. Go on to the technology. So this is a hotly debated area. And it goes to kind of the nomenclature piece and how we define intelligent automation broadly. But so thinking about what the right mix of technologies to offer the fastest time to value with least disruption, we've defined this new automation toolbox to include a broad set of potential tools. It's really on a continuum from very simple to highly complex, and requiring varying degrees of collaboration between business functions and IT. And then based on what we see in the market, and Dan confirmed with the Forbes study, the market is moving quickly to automation that leverages unstructured data extraction and orchestration of collective intelligence that's happening at a rate that I think is unprecedented. It took us a while to get really comfortable, more or less comfortable with RPA, although some folks are still on the kind of left-hand side of that bell curve. But now, as it accelerates in terms of wanting to scale, these technologies are becoming more and more important. And also thinking back to that first slide that Dan had, one of his early slides, the rule of 3 5s with fewer than 5 decisions, 500 clicks, and 5 apps accessed. While it still may apply to RPA alone, we're finding that when we combine simple and more complex automation technologies, it creates a multiplier effect with a much bigger impact. For example, simple example, just adding data extraction to read purchase order emails. We can have the automation fill forms automatically and trigger requisition process steps and really only involve humans for exceptions. So while the underlying technology is, something to recognize, these things are not necessarily new. It's the way they're packaged up and brought to the masses in a low-code or no-code manner that's new. When you think about RPA, in fact, we were doing RPA, exactly that, back in the mid-90s. Unfortunately, we called it non-invasive middleware back then, so it didn't really catch on quite like robotics. But the technology's been around for a while. And I think really, if you think about what's throttling the rate of new technologies, it really comes down to how it's delivered, right? How can we present it to users so that they can drive some really pretty powerful stuff? So in terms of what we're seeing emerging now, beyond orchestration and data capture, we're seeing emergence of business user-driven tools to drive conversational interfaces. So unlike, kind of conventional, and I use conventional kind of tongue-in-cheek, right, chatbots that use keyword matching, these tools are context-based and can carry on a conversation while orchestrating other automations based on what they hear. Kind of a big deal in order to really expand this use more broadly of this type of technology. And as the space continues to mature, we're also seeing trends in automating automation. This is one of my favorite topics. I see a future where robots build robots, right? But for example, we're using technology now that all but eliminates the need for us to conduct a traditional as-is analysis. We're allowing robots on desktops to observe and document what people are doing in the current state and really improve the speed and accuracy at which we kind of complete some of these activities. So another area is in robotics as a service, where infrastructure and robots are automatically provisioned to meet processing demands. So my suggestion as it relates to technology is to take stock in what your organization has in its portfolio and look for the right underlying platform that can bring it all together as it relates to the business problem you're trying to solve. And then lastly on ROI and how we should think about ROI. I could talk about this for a long, long time, but let me start by saying we never suggest applying automation without having a well-defined case for the metrics that will be impacted. This is indeed an opportunity to pull all 3 levers of cost, quality, and speed, but we have to be clear on which of those we intend to impact and how we're going to measure the outcomes. When RPA was beginning to emerge a few years back, it was sold and purchased based on its inherent ability to replace headcount with robots. Clearly, that led to some disappointment among business leaders. But what we did find, though, is that even the simple task automation is that it led to creation of capacity in the workforce that could be harnessed to do other things, right? So then we had to start thinking about different metrics that we wanted to measure and use around, in addition to financial ROI. As you see here in a recent survey conducted by PwC, I was surprised to see this one too, that leadership sentiment is changing dramatically, where more than 50% are now looking at automation as a way to grow revenue. Whereas probably back in the old days, call it 6 months ago, it was really, or 8 months ago, we were really talking about just headcount reduction. So, and I think, this might be explained by the shift of automation from being focused only on the back office to now having a place in more customer-facing situations. And of course, the flip side of that is really the impact it's going to have on middle and back office. So now what appear to be mundane back office processes can have a direct impact on customer engagements. So let me give you one more example here. So imagine a software company where the front office has begun a campaign to better engage with government and nonprofit customers. What used to be an arduous back office tax process around processing tax-exempt certificates suddenly became critical to customer engagement. So by automating that process, the cycle went from several days to several seconds. So thereby, we were able to improve fulfillment times and eliminate billing errors associated with tax-exempt status. So no impact on headcount costs, but certainly an impact on customer satisfaction and throughput. So clearly, automation drives benefits that far extend well beyond financial ROI. So the punchline here is business units can become more agile when operations staff are empowered to automate manual tasks and apply their brain power to more critical thinking. So I'll leave you with this. Automation really should be defined based on business needs and delivering best experiences for employees and customers. To be successful, we must assess the business opportunity broadly, reimagine the experience required to streamline the process, and identify how automation can be integrated across the business. So with that, I thank you for your time. Good luck with your automation journey, and I'll turn it back to you, Daniel.
Hey, I'm sorry, Michael, can I ask you a question? This is Dan Armstrong.
Certainly.
Yeah, could you go back to the ROI slide, number 28? Yeah, I'm just curious that grow revenue is so much bigger than everything else, and yet the road to revenue lies through creating a better customer experience. So we have creating customer better experience only 3%, and grow revenue 57%. That seems like that doesn't seem consistent to me. Do you have can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, what is the road to revenue through RPA?
Yeah, I think if you take the example of just a software company, throughput in the case of the simple kind of back office tasks around the tax certificates really allowed them to not only sell software faster but sell more of it to that particular market that they were engaged with. Right, so it's not just about having chatbots on the front end or different digital means of communicating and interacting with your clientele, but it's also about how do I service them from the back and middle office. And I think that's really kind of bringing those things through from front to back is what's having the major impact, not just directly that interaction with the client.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Dan and Michael, for all the good information. I think this was highly valuable to see. Also some surprises, honestly, so glad to see that. And I think we can go ahead very soon to the Q&A, but let me quickly spend maybe a few words on Kofax here. So Kofax is here really a market-leading provider of AI-powered robotic process automation solutions. So Michael had this very nice in his automation toolkit slide here, where all those different components are included. And Kofax is helping here already more than 650 enterprises, BPO providers, and shared service organizations around the world using Kofax RPA. And this in various use cases. This could be in attended, unattended use cases, and also connects to a broad variety of applications that you typically have in place. And yeah, this might be web applications, mainframe applications, could be other business applications, or even office applications that all the employees are working every day, like Excel, Word, and so on, where often a lot of data is really just copied into those applications or to other sources. And this is where you can typically automate really all your manual tasks of the users. And with that, as Dan and Michael mentioned here, you really can quick achieve here your digital transformation strategies to achieve not only operational excellence here, but also to optimize the customer engagement, retention, but also reduce the business costs. But as you've seen, the majority of the driver nowadays is really increasing the revenue stream here as you automate your very often back office processes here as well. We have over 20 years already experience in this space. Here, especially also when we talk about documents that need to get processed within those business processes. So I keep this short at this point so we can cover here now some questions. But if you have more questions or if you're interested, here is a link that I can provide to you to look up more information on Kofax RPA here as well. So with that, let's go ahead with the Q&A session. And let me check what questions we have in our chat. Let me see. I have a first one. Maybe for Dan, let's start with you first. What was the biggest surprise in the survey results for you? So Michael raised something, but what was it for you? And Dan, you might be still on mute.
I apologize. I was on mute there. Yeah, I think I think when Michael, I think I covered this previously. I think when Michael asked me the question, I think the biggest surprise was the level of optimism, sort of the sort of overall sense among the survey respondents that we've got this. You know, we've got this nailed. We're optimized. Our processes are great, and that took a little bit of thinking about how to interpret that, because I don't really think that's completely accurate. So it required thinking about what does optimization mean, and how process, and basically paying attention to the follow-up questions about how processes could be improved, given the fact that many of them think that they're optimized already. So that was the biggest surprise for me, I think.
Okay, sounds good. There is another one. Maybe this is a good one for Michael here as well. How do you get started with RPA, and what should you consider? What are maybe some best practices you have experienced in that one, Michael?
Yeah, sure. I haven't heard that question from a client since this morning. So it's pretty typical. Where do we get started on this thing? And back in the old days, again, call it 6 months ago, the starting point was, let's conduct a POC with a set of technology, see what the outcomes are, and move from there. So really a technology-focused approach to this. But thankfully, those days, I think we'd all agree, thankfully, are drawing to a close. Organizations are starting to realize that the technology works. What we need to determine is how it can work for us. So my recommendation is typically start small, but identify an opportunity that is related to some sort of known business challenge or pain point, and move to a small pilot where you can actually get something into production, right? Again, take our word for it, the technology works. Really what you're trying to prove is that you can get value out of it, right? So in terms of some of best practices, first and foremost, in my opinion anyway, is become proficient at identifying good candidates for automation. I think I alluded to before, because we can automate something doesn't mean we should automate it, right? So start to get a sense of which processes are suitable, have the right level of complexity, and are going to have the right impact, right? And that's a proficiency that I would suggest that everybody build upon and go broadly with it. The next thing, the other big one for me anyway, is don't go it alone. It really takes a village to make this work, and it requires collaboration between the business, with IT, with HR, with risk management, a lot of different constituents in the firm. And I would suggest that you're really not going to have much success, and certainly not going to be able to scale unless you do have that level of collaboration.
Okay, makes all sense, yes. Maybe there's another one coming from one of the attendees here as well. You said, Michael, or you talked basically about the ROI and what kind of ROI or criteria are considered nowadays. But what are the challenges in estimating the ROI? So what is the difficulty here?
Yeah. So that's a good point, right? And it kind of goes back to what I said about becoming proficient at identifying it and really quantifying the potential results. And it's not like we can't simply go to some benchmark and say, hey, listen, if I optimize my procure to pay function, I'm going to get this type of output from it, because so much of it is dependent on how you do it today. So there is a bit of an art to it in terms of estimating impacts, but it's not impossible. Right? We take essentially an algorithmic approach to it, to identify kind of all the different elements, kind of going back to the rule of fives, right? How many different systems are involved and how many different clicks and all those sorts of things in order to estimate kind of how much, starting with how much we can automate, and then be able to compare that to the baseline of the time it takes today, right? So there's a little bit of art to it, but it's not impossible. despite there not being any real benchmarks.
Okay, yeah, good points. There is one about the industry. So Michael, I think you mentioned some industries and Dan as well, so banking, retail. But however, there's this question, what about the healthcare industry? Wasn't mentioned specifically here. And someone would like to hear a little bit about the possibilities in RPA in healthcare. And in particular, I see here towards back office operations in the question. And I think if we take a look, and let me try to start here first to answer, if we take a particular look in healthcare, I think if you think about patient eligibility or physician credentialing, patient services, there are typically a lot of manual steps involved. So if you look over the shoulders of the people, you will definitely see that a lot of information needs to be typed in somewhere or copied from one system to another one. So there is huge potential, but also what I typically recommend to a lot of organizations across industry, finance, accounting, human resource, also especially in healthcare, I think dealing with a lot of people in those organizations, there are so many processes, starting from payroll, hiring, onboarding, recruiting processes, where RPA can really make a tremendous change here. Just checking, Michael, if you want to add here anything else.
Well, Daniel, I think you're spot on. There are a couple of things I would add. I mean, you think about those environments, and we've always said in healthcare, it's they have one of everything and nothing talks to the other, right? So just kind of from a base technology perspective makes a great target. I'll tell you from our experience right now, the healthcare pipeline has really just exploded and call it the last 3 to 6 months. So I think they're starting to catch on in this space.
Okay, yeah, good addition here. So let's go on to the last question because we are very close to the top of the hour. The last one would be the proposal that operations will own and drive RPA is being viewed as a form of a shadow IT. Quite interesting question here. So how should companies position the concept of RPA to their IT? Michael, maybe here?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. And, whether it's, there has to be ownership. And, we are seeing that, typically it is going to be somebody in the business that owns this capability. But think of it as a capability, and it's, center of excellence, whatever term you like. But it really does need to kind of stand on its own with the support and collaboration of all those organizations that I mentioned earlier. So, obviously, there's as you get more mature and you want to use more complex technologies, things change. But I think that is the absolute right way for us to be going.
Okay, thanks a lot. So with that, yes, thanks a lot to Dan and Michael for all the information. And back to you, Rochelle.
Okay, thank you so much for the entire team, Dan, Daniel, Michael, and the rest of the team, which includes all of you who have joined us for this live session, as well as those of you who are listening to the on-demand. Lots of amazing insights here. You were right. Before we got on the line, everyone said there might be some surprises by the outcomes to this research, and I certainly found several things that I was remarkably surprised by. So thanks so much for sharing that with us and for all of the information and insights that you shared today. With that, I just wanted to highlight with everyone, as a reminder, for those of you who may not have heard at the beginning, one business day from today, you'll receive an email with a link to this session. So if you would like to, you may play back the session. You can review the slides inside that link. Also, please don't forget to take away your free giveaways, your digital gift bag, we call it, in the resource list, those 3 additional resources that will help you with use cases, finding the right solution, and also how to make sure you use RPA as a competitive edge. Coming up next today, our final session of day 1 is going to be your Automation Foundation Essentials. We're going to be talking about scaling at enterprise level. We're going to be talking a bit about what are the advantages of waterfall versus agile and why that's important in IA, and also looking at total cost and total returns. That's the Automation Foundation Essentials that can be available at 1:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. We hope to see you all back then. And with that, this now concludes today's webinar session.